exploring new ideas, and stepping in requires a lot of reading. So today I'll be sharing that. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, the view that cognition is computation is most plausibly read as a central hypothesis of classical cognitive science. Intelligent behavior is explained by positing internal representational structures and computational procedures that operate over them. So, in simpler terms, what's being stated here is that when we're trying to study cognitive science, there is a view that cognition is computational, meaning it's very calculated. It doesn't necessarily express in numbers, but it can be evaluated in numbers, which lead us towards certain conclusions that can be represented by linear algebra, for example. If you look at Hebbian learning, one of the equations of Hebbian learning, that certainly points into the direction of how new synapses, new neuronal connections are formed. Very quickly, will show that particular equation. So that is here. So Hebbian learning synapse equation, new connections. It's a very famous, well-known equation that we pick up on. So most basic rule is d over derivative t equals to wij equals to c times vij. So Hebbian learning describes how synaptic strength wij, so this is this measurement of this strength, increases when a presynaptic neuron j, so the presynaptic endpoint, repeatedly helps activate a postsynaptic neuron I. So J and I both connect together. The basic mathematical formulation is delta strength of I post J pre equivalent to mao xi xj, where mao is the learning rate and xi and xj are activities. So this is how Hebbian the Hebbian learning equation allows us to understand how new synapses are formed and also understanding at the same time the way in which we can step into understanding more about neuroplasticity. So, neuroplasticity is the idea that new brain connections are formed when we learn something new. So, the connections strengthen. That's one concept. And that further leads into connectionism, kind of, where each stimuli taken in has its own unique representation that connects with another and then it connects with another. If you recall the model I showed by Koslin from the 80s, exactly speaks about that. So you have the input layer, the hidden layer, and the output layer. So these are just mechanistic explanations of certain processes, right? So on this image, minds do not merely react to stimuli, they process information by transforming internal states in the in systematic ways that can be described at an algorithmic level. So an algorithmic level is what I showed earlier. Before that, we also looked at another algorithm by Bishara and colleagues looking at the Wisconsin card sorting test and how that equation was trying to look at decision sensitivity and selection. And of course, looking at preservation errors, and set errors. So the attraction is not metaphorical, it is a claim about what makes cognition scientifically tractable. If we can specify the representational format and the rules that transform these representations, we can predict performance patterns, characteristic errors, and selective impairments, and we can replace vague appeals to understanding with a mechanistic story that does not rely on a homunculus who already grasps meanings. Now, homunculus, a reason it's mentioned here because it's a classical and quite frankly very, very ridiculous understanding of human cognition. So, homunculus is a made up little man which has many parts trying to explain cognition. Yes, that's correct. This is what it looks like. So it's very ugly, very bizarre theory, the homunculus, right? To explain what cognition is computation amounts to, it will begin to help with the representational theory of mind, RTM, which we will step into today, and its development into the computational theory of mind. Representational theory of mind treats many mental states as relations to mental representations whose semantic properties determine what the state is about. To believe that it is raining is to be appropriately related to representation with the content. Thinking and reasoning are then sequences of such representational states. So RTM states that mental states are relations to mental representations and to a degree their respective semantic properties determine what the state is about. So if I'm looking at a piece of art, right? When I'm looking at a piece of art, it's telling me that hey, it's about, for instance, if I look at Venetian period in Italy, right? A portrait of Venice from the Enlightenment era, more or less, post pap well, during the papacy sort of period, where the Republic was against the papacy. I could look at that representation, and in my mind, the mental state is processing what I'm looking at through semantic properties which determine my state. So I know it's a painting, I know it's not a video, I know it's not a digital photograph by virtue of the representation. Now, this consequently, thinking and reasoning are then sequences to such representational states. So, thinking and reasoning is what comes after this. On this representational picture, the step to a computational account becomes natural once we add language of thought hypotheses. So, language of thought, LOTH, is an interesting concept which we will step into in a bit more, inshallah. If mental representations are structured in a combinatorial, as in a combination esque, language like way, mentalese, a term created by Fodor, then cognitive processes can be modeled as a rule govern transition between representational states, much as a valid inference moves from P and if then Q to Q. Correct. Computational theory of mind, in its classical form, states that these transitions are computational. They are sensitive to the form syntactic properties of representations and proceed according to rules that can be specified independently of what the representation mean, although the overall pattern or transition is semantically coherent when the representations are interpreted. So what this is stating is that the syntactic the so the sensitivity of syntactic properties of representations painting, you're looking at the semantic property, sorry, the syntactic property which now exists, it proceeds towards rules. So there are rules that my mind has to is governed by, and these rules can be specified and outlined and broken down independently of what these representations mean. Although the overall pattern of transition, so the transition from representational theory of mind (RTM) to computational theory of mind, this transition allows us to not only dig deeper into breaking down these specific representations, even though if the overall pattern of transition is semantically coherent when the representations are interpreted. So, in its simplest form, it's being stated that we can very easily look at specific models that can allow us to understand the representation of what we're looking at. So, an example of this are examples of this are two. So, number one, let's look at the ACT-R model, ACT-R model, and then I'm going to show you the SOAR model. So, ACT-R again is a cognitive architecture developed by Anderson and Christian at Carnegie Mellon University. Like any cognitive structure, ACT-R aims to define the basic and irreducible cognitive and perceptual operations. So this is what's happening when it comes to representations, yeah? Cognitive and perceptual operations that enable the mind. And in theory, each task that humans can perform should consist of a series of these discrete operations. So now the rule exists, let's say looking at an image and the position of the image. Now we need to understand how this came into existence. In order to understand how this came into existence, we are now going to develop a model, or at least a model that's closest to the actual transition or phenomena that's happening. So, ACT-R, right? Again, seems a bit complicated, but I'm going to break this down as simply as I can, inshallah. So, you have the environment, auditory and physical world. Now, of course, in both cases, we're assuming the person is neither blind nor deaf. So you have the physical world, you have a motor module. So motor means movement in neuroscience. Motor buffer, where momentarily you're matching and selecting and executing your next move in a sense. Retrieval buffer, that particular representation, that data point is now moving into the intentional model. So what's going to happen next? And then, of course, within this buffer zone, you have sensory buffers, goal buffers, retrieval buffers. Now, each of them are more or less self-explanatory, but for the physical world, you have auditory, visual, sensory modules. So your striate cortex, which is your visual cortex here, just where your earlobe is, so just around this region. So imagine a band around your neck, just around under the earlobe, half of your ear. So from half of your ear round to the other end. The striate cortex essentially processes these images, and of course, there's a debate where, for instance, higher level visual processing addresses the lower level visual processing because the lower level cannot exactly figure out what the high level visual processing stage is doing. And in fact, there was some recent research that came out with mice. I was reading it this morning, and let me very quickly share that with you. Let me see if I can pull up a screenshot actually, because I took some. Bismillah. Really fascinating because you can't really. So, screenshot. Right, so Try and get this paper very quickly, just to give you an idea. Here we go. So this is a well-known neuroscience news website. I often come across the newsletters that they update every day, literally. So, new research: visual experience shapes the brain's feedback loop. Right, so we're going to quickly just read the summary and some key things I highlighted. So, the brain's visual system is a two-way street, but researchers have long debated how the return lane, the feedback connection from higher level areas back to low level ones, is constructed. New research reveals that these connections are not pre-wired or generic; they are instructive and physically shaped by early visual experiences. So, what they did is they obstructed the visual system of mice by placing goggles with specific colors and contextual integration, i.e., changing how they are perceiving the world around them. And by raising mice with miniature goggles, so I'm quite intrigued how they had miniature goggles that limited their sight to specific orientations. Scientists prove that the brain's wiring directly reflects the specific patterns of the world an individual sees. So, the specific patterns that your brains develop early on really make you see how the world is. So if you see horizontal or vertical more, that's how your perception is, apparently. These feedback loops act as a learned bridge between the big picture and fine details, ensuring that our internal neural maps are bespoke reflection of our unique history. What's interesting is the biological and the neuroscientific relation that computational neuroscience takes into account, because here it says the feedback loops. What's happening here in ACTAR, if I go back to the flowchart here, you can see there's a feedback loop in a sense, because the arrows are two-way. It's two-way arrow, right? And this buffer zone is essentially where everything is supposedly being processed and analyzed and looked at. So yeah, sensory buffers. So these are your senses, selection, execution, and matching, and this produces the desired outcome, which is gold buffer. If you remember a few streams ago, we were speaking about you have the initial point, so this is your general state, and then you have the goal state. So every single human being wants to go from the general state they're in to the goal state, right? So I don't mean by goals as in a big house, a Ferrari Testarossa, a farmland, or a dream holiday and all this other nonsense. Why? Well, apart from the farm, what I'm talking about is you're going from the general state that I need to wake up in the morning, and the goal state is to get to my conference on time so I can listen to Kershaw Mind Matter meaning speak at the neuroscience conference and not miss what he has to say, for example, right? So all the processes that happen in between, and we talked about this as well on a few streams a few weeks ago on one of the streams, that between the stimulus and the response, there's a mediation process that's going on. So it's not simply a case of I look at something, I react, I look at something, I react, I look at something, I react. That's one aspect of decision making. And in neuroscience, there's various areas of decision making. You have deliberative model of decision making, which means you carefully plan out and structure what you're about to do. And this entails, of course, the cholinergic activation, and your dopamine levels are very much correlated with this. So once you successfully execute an action and get the and make the move from the general state to the goal state, your dopamine levels obviously increase. There's a huge jump in satisfaction, momentarily, of course. And then you have your procedural, which means there's a procedure A, B, C. A leads to B, B leads to C. and then obviously at times you have to adapt. Then you have what Reddish calls Pavlovian activation selection. So you're conditioned to activate a particular response. However, that response may not always correlate with what's happening within that situation. Again, not going to go into that too much at the moment. And then with this, you have different areas of memory that are correlated. So you have content addressable memory, CAM, you have working memory, which is what's happening in the moment, you have semantic memory, which very much is related to what we're talking about today. You have long term memory, you have short term memory, and you have, for example, Baddeley's model, and then you have the idea where the hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex, all of this plays a role when it comes to memory formation. So, all in all, it's not simply a case of A plus B plus C. Okay. Okay, this is what's interesting about the research I just showed you. So, another way to phrase, another way to phrase the issue is to ask whether feedback connections wire themselves to specific content-related subsets of neurons in lower visual areas. So, within the lower visual areas, whereby is it a case whereby the feedback connections being formulated or existing, do they wire themselves to specific content related subsets? So if I'm looking at again a picture from the Venetian era in Italy in the 18th century, I'm looking at, for example, a scene across a bridge near the ravine, near a river. Now, it could be that the lower visual areas are processing the contour of the waves of the river and the bricks that have been painted in terms of the bridge and the trees, contours, so on and so forth. However, the higher visual processing is telling me, hey, here's a tree, here's a river, here's a lake, here's a building. Naturally, I'm not going to climb up the tree. Naturally, I'm not going to swim in that river. What I'm going to do is cross the bridge, gaze at the tree, and then enter the building. Right? Someone might want to jump off the bridge into the river and have a swim. Point is that are they are the lower visual areas doing this generically as stated here, independently of context, or not? And the study that I just showed you shows that these connections do in fact play an instructive role. So their organization is not generic. So when I look at a Venetian Italian painting of a bridge and a tree and a building, this is not generic, where every time I look at a tree and a bridge and a building, let's say in London or in Cairo or in Oman or in Karachi or anywhere else, they are unique connections in and of themselves. It's not the same one going here and there, going here and there, going here and there. So I'm not really surprised to really know of this finding. Of course, it's difficult to prove one's hypothesis because I know personally that every experience is unique. And in Islam, that's why it's encouraged to go out and see how the world is in Surah Ar-Ra'd, if I remember correctly, but definitely in Surah Ar-Rum, the surah that personally changed my life was Surah Ar-Rum, is go out and look at the people before you and how they were destroyed. Even Surah Al-Ankabut, ayah number 3, speaking in a different context, but look at the people before you. So it's very important to have these experiences. And so what they found is that animals with different visual experiences and very different tuning properties and patterns of organization in these feedback connections shaped by what they had seen since birth. Incredible, subhanallah. So, going back to Yeah, going back to the content, this is actor. Next one I would like to speak about is SOAR. Excuse me. Act means action. Let me try and think. Adaptive control of thought. Rational. There's act or star. I guess I'll show it to you if you're interested. Well, I am interested in showing. I have the book, but I can't remember the name of the guy now. Where is it? Oh, Act Star. Sorry, not Actor Star. Act Star. Act Star model is a cognitive structure by John Anderson in the 80s, developed in the 80s to explain human cognition function as a production system that divides knowledge into declarative facts and procedural forms and skills. So so the approach he's now taken is the subset as another subset. So it's even gone more nano, even more micro with it. It explains how knowledge is acquired, stored, retrieved through memory, ultimately modeling how people think and solve problems. Now, I remember reading his text and I never had the chance really to go back to it. So what we'll do is find it here. There we go. And it should be here bookmarks. This is our highlights, I think. Okay. Bookmarks, maybe not. Okay. I'm very confident that I read. Here we go. Yeah, here it is. So, do, 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 mhm, mhm, mhm. Just trying to find a. Here we go. This is what I found of interest. So this is page 5. Okay, production systems, history, and status. Okay, so production system theories have gradually increased in prominence in psychology over the past decade. Their basic claim is that underlying human cognition is a set of conditioned action pairs called productions. The condition specifies some data patterns, and if elements matching these patterns are in working memory, then the production can apply. So now you can obviously clearly see that there is a oops, there's very obviously a matchup here between what I talked about when it came to Act R. This is Act Star, moving further into production systems, and then after that, looking at memory, of course, and looking at the cognition, how knowledge is understood, stored, and retrieved thereafter. So the basic claim is that the condition specifies some data patterns, and if elements matching these patterns are working memory, then the production applies. This is actually a very good sentence. The action specifies what to do in that state. So the action is now specifying, similar to Pavlovian action selection, as Reddish speaks about, right? So the action specifies what to do in the state. So now you're in a particular state, now you're going to take an action. It dictates that. Very simple, nice and easy. So the basic action is to add new data elements to working memory. Informally stated, a typical production rule might be if person 1 is the father of person 2 and person 2 is the father of person 3, then person 1 is the grandfather of person 1 is the grandfather of person 3. This is exactly what I mean by if P then Q here. Very, very basic line of logic happening here. I don't need to go into modal logic here or philosophical logic, but this is very straightforward. Right, so that's that. And so that's act star. The only difference here is that it's going more into the production side of things. The key elements divides knowledge into declarative facts and procedural rules. Simulates how people process information such as scanning, encoding, and using productions for actions. Learning explains how knowledge changes from declarative to procedural through practice. Interesting how he's talking about this decision making aspect. I wasn't aware of ActStar's aspect of this. Cognitive architecture consists of modules including memory and perceptual motor systems, allowing for a comprehensive view of mental processes. Applications, it can be used to evaluate cognitive abilities and simulate problem solving with application in educational settings. I actually have an educational neuroscience book there. Let's see if they quote this guy. This is the book, Educational Neuroscience. This one here. Maybe they quote him, maybe not. Let's. Okay. G. Anderson. Actor, yeah. Subhanallah. Exactly here. So here is actor. See it right here. Adaptive control of thought. So pages number 52 and 53. 52 and 53. Let me see if they have SOAR here before we proceed. SOAR. Hmm. SOAR is more LLM. 52 and 53. Okay. Interestingly, I will read more into this. Okay, so page number 52, right? Gonna step into this. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. One widely used symbolic model of cognitive processing is called ACT-R. Adaptive control of thought, rational. This system is intended as an overarching cognitive architecture capturing how the whole mind works. The key components of ACT-R are inspired by processing distinctions observed in the brain, and in particular the distinction between declarative memory, explicit facts and knowledge, and procedural memory, implicit knowledge and skills. Yeah, these are two memories I forgot. Declarative, which is explicit, and procedural, which is implicit. The system has different specialized components that reflect this distinction. At the heart of ACT-R lie procedural if-then rules. If a certain set of conditions hold, then a certain behavior is produced. The system has working memories or buffers of current knowledge, reflecting both new inputs and its previous processing states. So as previous processing states, then it is working, as shown in the picture here. This the system's library of rules competes to find that the rule that most closely matches the current state of the buffers. The winning rule then produces a subsequent behavior. When the rule is executed, it may then alter the knowledge in the buffers. So once it's executed here, it might change rules in the buffer, which triggers the next winning roll and so forth. In ACTR, cognition proceeds as a succession of rule operations. ACTR is symbolic in the sense that it contains discrete variables and syntactic rule-based operations, although the performance of the system may also depend on what is referred to as sub-symbolic quantities, such as the strength of productions and the base level of activation for a chunk of knowledge. Anderson and Schoen 2000. ACTR has been used to model a variety cognitive processes, including memory, attention, executive control, language, and problem solving. One widely used symbolic model of cognitive processing is the artificial neural network. Rumelhart, McClelland, Spencer Thomas McClelland, Thomas and McClelland. So we spoke about McClelland a few weeks ago, actually. As we have seen, artificial neural networks are abstractions that capture some of the key properties of computation carried out by neural circuits. The brain comprises a large number of neurons that electrically signal to each other via highly connected networks. Artificial neural networks contain simple processing units, each with an activation value, and a network of connections through which the activity of each processing unit can influence the activity of other processing units. I'll show the equation for this as well, which is very interesting. A key property of neural systems is that they are adaptive. The strengths of the connections between units can be altered incrementally to bring the network's output closer to the desired behavior given its inputs. Many of the artificial neural network learning algorithms are based on Hebbian learning, which I spoke about in the opening few minutes. The principle that units that fire together should wire together. In other words, if two units are firing at the same time, they are probably both involved in performing the same computation. Therefore, the connection between them should be strengthened so that they encourage each other to fire when the units receive equivalent inputs the next time around. Reddish also mentions this. I'm inshallah going to make a separate video, not a live stream, speaking about this and some of the limitations and challenges that I feel exist at the very early stages of my career so far. So, artificial neural networks activation value. It's a very interesting equation here. So, it's a summation. Artificial neural networks activation value equation. Yeah. So, as you can see here, ANN activation value y or a is calculated by passing the weighted sum of inputs plus a bias. So here you have z, which is the summation of the weights of the inputs plus b through a non-linear function. So function of z typically represents as y is the equals to the function of all of this. The most common activation rule is ReLU function of z equals to max 0 comma z. I'm not familiar with this ReLU. What's ReLU? Rectified linear unit. Function of x is max in deep learning for CNN. The MLP's outputs inputs directly if positive, otherwise zero, helping mitigate vanishing gradient problems. Okay, and accelerate training. However, it may cause a dying ReLU. Interesting. Not sure what ReLU is, but okay, inshallah, we'll check it out. So, weighted sum input function z is weight 1, weight 2, weight 3, and correlation x1, x2, x3. So these are other formulas as well. Okay, what I'm hoping to step into is this one here. So Activation function. Here we go. This is what we need. Softmax. No, it's not the one. Where's the? Is it non-linear? I think it's non-linear. Math behind. Is it this one? I think. I don't think it's imperial. Oh yeah, here it is. This looks familiar to me. Yeah, so if you remember, I was talking about this input layer, hidden layer, output layer. And then you have all these formulae that you use. Right, so this is something I actually need to step into more for my PhD because the mathematics is important. But I have a very, very basic surface level idea of what's happening here. Okay, so let's now quickly touch on SOAR. Okay, SOAR, oriented model. SOAR is prominent cognitive architecture designed to model the fixed computational building blocks of general intelligence, created in 1993 by John Lord, Alan Newell, and Paul Rosenblum. Alan Newell wrote a book called Unified Cognition, I think, if I remember correctly, it's Unified Cognition. Pretty sure it is. Vision. Definitely have it. Anyway, Unified Cognition. Actually, let me very quickly pull it up here. Unified Cognition. Okay. Oh my God, does he have 12, 11 hours of
Let's let me begin, please. On behalf of the psychology department, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Alan Newell, who will deliver the lecture tonight, being Wolfgang Köhler, speaking on the place.
The difference. But all right, let us start. These are all wanderings. If one is given the William James lecture, one must do something with it. Okay, so what are we going to do? There we are. What I'm going to do, as soon as I get the technology going here. There we are. So here's the theme. I'm going to talk about unified theories of cognition. And the theme is, let me just read it for you. Psychology has arrived at the possibility of unified theories of cognition. That is, theories that gain their power by having a single system of mechanisms that operate together to produce the full range of human cognition. Okay, they are within reach. It doesn't say they are here. They are within reach, and we should.
Right, let me get hold of this. Important I share this. Newell's book. See much later. See much later. Later. Alan Newell, by the way, wrote a lot of books on this topic. never ending, really. Right, so we need this one here. Let's check it out. Do downloads quickly. So this is basically a photocopy of the book. So you can see here contents. Hopefully it's clear, inshallah. Nature of theories. What are unified theories? The psychology ready task of the book. Behaving knowledge represent. Here we go. Representation. This is of interest at the moment. Representation systems. Okay. And should I go into behavior, symbolic processing? '54. Okay. 54. Let's see what he has to say regarding representations. Right. So representation. Knowledge abstracts from representation, yet knowledge must be represented in some fashion in order to be used, told, or thought. So that could be visual, this could be audio, this could be a number of types of knowledge. This may seem like a special philosophical statement justified by some particular argument, but it's not. It is simply the proposition that knowledge level systems are simultaneously describable at lower levels. Interesting how we just spoke about visual lower levels and processes that are involved, which is a separate thing. But here we see from a computational point of view how the biological, I want to say substrate, that's incorrect, the underpinnings exist. So without this, none of Alan's work or any of the computational neuroscientists can do anything about their work. It's all null and void, in my view. Is simply the proposition that knowledge level systems are simultaneously describable at lower levels, and that systems that exist in the physical world have physical descriptions. Thus, to use figure 2.3 as a guide, a knowledge level system that exists in the physical world can also be described as a programmed system, a register transfer system, a logic system, an electrical circuit, an electronic device. So figure 2.3, where is it? Figure 2.3, he said, can be used here. Okay, so knowledge level systems you have here. So medium is knowledge, Lowell's principle of rationality, of course. Program level systems, medium data structures and programs. Laws, sequential interpretation of programs. Register transfer systems, bit vectors. So you need a direction and a weight. Parallel logic. It has to be simultaneous logic to what's happening. Logic circuits, bits, Boolean algebra. Boolean algebra is 1010 matrix, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, a branch of mathematics by George Boole deals with variables having two values, true or false. Unlike elementary algebra, it uses logical operators, specifically and, or, and not. to manipulate binary variables, serving as the mathematical foundation for digital circuit design and computer logic. Even in coding, Boolean matrix are used. Logic is used, of course. Electrical circuits, voltage and current, Ohm's law, Kirchhoff's law. Kirchhoff's law. Electronic devices, electrons, electron physics. Right, okay. Go back here. Of course, the hierarchy of that figure is not necessarily the only hierarchy that can have knowledge systems on the top. The figure exhibits one hierarchy that we know of. That does include knowledge systems. Other hierarchies might well exist, indeed, in the case of humans who are describable as knowledge systems better than any of the computer systems we have around. The hierarchy must be quite different as it makes its way down to the biological substrate. So it makes its way down to the biological substrate. Right, so that was the right word I used. Hang on, let me double check. Substrate versus underpinnings. Substrate and underpinning refer to foundational concepts in engineering, construction, biology, but they differ in function. Substrate refers to underlying layer, substance or material upon which organism lives, grows, or upon which a process occurs. Yeah, so all of this occurs on the biological substrate. So that I was correct. Subhanallah. Rabbi zidni ilma. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Underpinning is a construction technique used to strengthen, repair, or stabilize an existing weak foundation by extending its depth or increasing its capacity. Okay, so example is used in structural engineering. Strengthen or stabilize the soil foundation. Here, used in ecology, it provides natural support for structure. So yeah, the biological substrate necessary for computational understanding of cognition. Establishing the existence of alternative hierarchies that support knowledge level is a scientific task or engineering task, depending on whether we discover the hierarchy by analysis of existing systems or invent it by design and construction of hitherto non-existing systems. Hitherto means within the moment, within the time. Until now, up in this point. Let us turn then to the nature of representation, which is another fundamental concept in cognitive science. Let us start by being specific. A standard view of representing knowledge is with a logic. Figure 2.5 provides such a representation for the blocks world. The representation consists of the expression in the figure. There is a predicate block that can be used to assert that A is a block, B is a block, C is a block, and the table T is not a block. Another predicate on. Predicate is something that qualifies or identifies part of a sentence containing verb and can state something about the subject. Something which is affirmed or denied concerning an argument or proposition. So yeah, confirmation. State, affirm, assert about the subject sentence or an argument of a proposition. Declare, affirm, found or base something else. Could predicate be to confirm a statement or proposition? Yes. Okay. Another predicate clear is defined in terms of block on X is clear if only and only if X is a block, and if Y is any block, then it is not on X. From this information, it can be inferred that block B is not clear. Thus, if expressions 1 to 3 in figure 2.5 represent what X knows, then X knows that B is not clear. Right, and if we couple this with the knowledge of X's goal and Y's request and X's ability to communicate, then we can predict that X will tell Y that B is not clear. X's goal, Y's request, and X's ability. Okay, so figure 2.5, let's see where it is. 2.5 is obviously going to be here. Number 1, block A, block B, block C, not block T, on block B, T, on A, B, on C, T. Clear X if block X and Y block Y implies not on YX. Infer not clear B. So that would be inferred how? That would be clear B, block B, C clear X if block X, and Y block Y implies not YX. So Y is oh, so block A, block B, and block C, and not block T. On block is on the table, okay, and A is on B, and C is on the table. Did I get that right? No, I don't understand this. Let me get half of the chat GPT to explain this to me. Okay. Explain in loose and easy language following logic while having new simple life example. Review. Okay. Okay, so this is just an example of an A, B, C code or D code. Right. Okay. So here's what Newell is doing in figure 2.5 around he's showing how a tiny bit of knowledge written in logic can generate new knowledge by inference without writing the new fact down explicitly. First, translate the block world into plain English. Think of a table with three toy blocks, A, B, C, and table T. Number 1, block A, B, C, and not block T. A is a block, B is a block, C is a block, T, the table is not a block. So block is a category label. The table is a different kind of thing. Posit 2. On B, T on A, B on C, T. B is on the table, A is on top of B, and C is on the table. Yeah, that's what I thought. So the physical scene is stack number one. A is on B and B is on the table. C is sitting directly on the table. Number three, definition of clear. Clear X if block X and Y block Y implies not on YX. So X is clear if number one, X is a block. So in this case, A is a block. For every Y, if Y is a block, so if Y is B a block, then Y is not on X. In normal talk, a block is clear if nothing is sitting on top of it. That is, Y implies part is just logic way of saying for any block Y is not on X. Now the inference, why does 4 follow? Not clear B. Meaning B is not clear, something is on top of B. And what is on top of B? A is on top of B. So step by step reasoning, very simply. B is a block, A is on B, so there exists a block A that is on B. If B were clear, then no block could be on B. Since A is on B, then the condition fails. So B cannot be clear. That's the entire logic move. Definition of clear plus facts about on, conclusion about clear. Simple life example. Is the chair free? Facts. Sam is a person. Sam is sitting on the chair. Rule definition. A chair is free if no person is sitting on it. Inference. Therefore, the chair is not free. Exactly the same pattern as B. Clear is free on Y, X is sitting on X. Why Newell cares about this? Bigger point is after the figure. Logic here is representation of what X knows, not necessarily how X's brain literally stores it. If X has facts 1 to 3, then X has other facts that follow from them 4, even if they were never written down explicitly. So the knowledge is bigger than the list of statements because inference can generate more. Okay, similar to in the Quran, it doesn't say that, for example, chicken burger is halal, but it gives a clear statement of fact, and I gain knowledge that I must eat meat in a certain way, and the hadith explains the methodology of, for example, the dhibah. And then after that, I add lettuce, I add mayonnaise, I add chili sauce, so on and so forth. So the inference is created from there. Okay, that's a nice bit of information. Jazakallah khair. Yeah, Ellen Newell. Right, so SOAR. It's been over an hour. Only been through a couple of paragraphs. SOAR is a prominent cognitive architecture designed to model the fixed computational building blocks of general intelligence created by John Allen and Paul, used by researchers to develop intelligent agents that can solve problems, plan, and learn in human-like ways. So, something like this is happening here. Right. SOAR, SOAR functions as a production system where all behavior is viewed as a search through a problem space. It operates through interactions of three main memory types. Number one, working memory represents the agent's current situation and goals as a symbolic graph. Two, procedural memory contains long-term how-to knowledge stored as if-then rules that fire in parallel when they match the current state in working memory. Long-term declarative memories include semantic memory for facts and episodic memory for specific past experiences. Decision cycle. Agents in SOAR proceed through a recurring decision cycle, typically lasting approximately 100 milliseconds in cognitive terms. Input. Updates working memory with new sensory data, elaboration. Rules fire in parallel to propose and evaluate potential operators and actions. Decisions. A fixed procedure selects the most preferred operator based on generated preferences. Better than, best. Fixed procedure will select the most preferred operator and generate preferences. Okay. Application. Rules fired to execute the selected operator, modifying working memory or issuing motor commands. Output. Sends commands to the external environment. Mechanism. Impasses and subgoaling. If knowledge is insufficient to make a decision, example given a tie between operators, SOAR automatically creates an impasse and a substrate. Impasse, a situation in which no progress is possible, especially because of a disagreement. Oh yeah, we reach an impasse. An impasse. The agent then reasons within the substate. It creates a impasse and a substate. The agent then reasons within the substate to resolve the original problem. Chunking. This is SOAR's primary learning mechanism. When an impasse is resolved, the architecture compiles the reasoning used into a new rule chunk so it can bypass the impasse in the future. Chunking. So SOAR's primary learning mechanism. When an impasse is resolved, the architecture compiles the reasoning used into a new rule chunk so it can bypass an impasse in the future. Spatial Visual System (SVSS), a specialized module for non-symbolic modality-specific reasoning like mental imagery and rotation. Interesting. Alhamdulillah, astaghfirullah. This would be a relevant paper. Chunking. Yeah, because in mice we know that sub goals lead to the ultimate goal, and there's evidence for that in study. Which study is it? It's on page. There it is. In Meyer's book, actually. So look at Meyer's book here. So fractional goal responses. That's what it is. Kendler and Kendler. Fractional goal responses. Here it is. So it's on page number 29. Let's show it here as well. Page number 29. 29. There you go. So, mediation theories such as Berline are generally extension of Hull's 1943 claim that animals make tiny responses in anticipation of the goal as they learn to solve a maze. He called these responses fractional goal responses. For example, rats made miniature licking movements as they ran down a maze towards a liquid reward. These fractional goal responses help the animal mediate between being put in the maze and performing the needed solution behavior. Kendall used the idea of mediating responses to describe developmental changes in discrimination learning. He used mediation reaction to explain the use of human language and meanings. Implicit associative responses to explain the course of human verbal learning. These theories are examples of mediational theory because they are based on the idea that tiny covert responses mediate between stimulus response. Interesting how they also talk about language, use of language meaning, so semantics. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Right, so That's SOAR in a nutshell. Production system. So if I was to, for example, go here and type in ACT-R versus SOAR. ACT-R and SOAR are prominent cognitive architectures designed to stimulate human-like intelligence, yet they diverge. In focus, ACT-R acts as a cognitive modeler. Simulating precise human psychological data, while SOAR acts as a general AI system focused on building intelligent agents with high functional efficiency. So it simulates precise human psychological data, that's ACT-R. SOAR is a general AI system focused on building intelligent agents for higher efficiency. ACT-R emphasizes memory learning, cognitive, perceptual, motor modules, where SOAR focuses on problem solving, decision making, and symbolic learning through chunking. Okay, so we didn't really look at a SOAR diagram. Mm, yeah. Wow, this would have been fun. 2008. Learn from internal rewards, symbolic long-term memories, episodic, semantic, procedural, visual imagery, action, perception, episodic learning, semantic learning, procedural, enforcement, semantic memory, situations, episodic memory, basic drives, and emotions, feelings, mood, non-symbolic reasoning, mental imagery, learn from regularity, spatial and temporal clusters. Right, speaking of irregularities, I know Koslin speaks about irregularities. Let me see if he mentions Lord's work at all. Probably does. I won't be surprised if he does. Okay, so AKLEI. No, unfortunately, it's not here. Maybe. No, he's not here. Interestingly, maybe Nemo may be here. Yeah, of course, Alan Newell's here. Yeah, Unified Theories of Cognition. Newell. H-I. Right, let me see when Newell. 39 and 40. Okay, 39 and 40. Okay, this is relevant, not in today's context, but it's talking about the weaknesses of systems, cognitive systems. Okay, that's definitely relevant. Let's put this here. Right, so trying this here. So yeah, moving on from these cognitive architectures, we're going to look at now moving forward from here. SOAR's model. This is what it is essentially. Why do I speak like a Mancunian? Essentially. So this is what we're looking at here. Actually, let's pull up large paper. Why not? Make much more sense. SOAR architecture. Yeah. Okay, view publication. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's a valid one. Right, so here as we saw in the 2008 picture, it's the same model, right? Although there seems to be an element I can see that's been added. Maybe it's unclear in the previous pictures. Appraisals, working with symbolic working memory. So, symbolic. Does symbolic working memory play a role in the Wisconsin consortium test? Yes. Yes. Okay. So here we have the body, which is what we are. Okay. And from this body, we are now perceiving the world, acting in the world, and forming mental imageries. Now, this is of the assumption that the person is not blind, deaf, or mentally, physically challenged. So, perception, short-term memory, mental imagery, relays, and there's a feedback with action. This is where, for example, corn is very powerful. So, mental imagery, action. Perceptual short-term memory, perceptual long-term memory. So when you think about that one person you saw doing something in a video or an image or a paint, let's say the Venetian painting, yeah, that's long-term perceptual memory. Now my short-term memory is that painting I saw on the wall in the gallery. Perceptual long-term memory is some features of that painting. Now what happens is symbolic working memory picks out details, as you can see, the dark circles, and then you have the decision procedure, which we spoke about earlier, about half an hour or so ago, regarding the different types of decision making systems. We have appraisals, which evaluate said knowledge in the buffer, said knowledge according to this model. Sorry, there's no buffer in this one, that's Act R. Reinforcement learning, developed by Sutton and colleagues, is allowing one to really grasp all this knowledge and utilizing it in a procedural way. Not only that, there's chunking. So chunking is where there's an impasse and a substate is created. So when there's an issue, it bypasses the impasse, and then you have symbolic long-term memories being formed. That's procedural, right? A leads to A plus, B leads to B plus, C leads to C plus, or A leads to 1, B leads to 2, C leads to 3. Next is semantic learning. Of course, this is words, excuse me, linguistics. I'm not going to go into that too much. To a large degree, music and the Quran and sacred scripture also fit into this category label, semantic learning. Okay, and then when you have tajweed rules, which is rules of recitation, that's procedural, of course. And episodic learning, which forms episodic memory, is again something that is sequential in chunks essentially, right? Like an episode of a TV show. That's why they call it episodes, because you're from a general place to the goal. Goal is to finish the series. General is the opening of the story, and then you have the climax, and then you have some twists and turns and some shockers and spoilers and whatnot, all the other goy slop that exists there. So this is what the SOAR cognitive architecture is proposed by Lard. Now we've covered all that. Let's go back to my text here. So if it opens, yeah. So Hoagland's semantic engines framework sharpens the idea. What's the idea of what the representations mean, right? A formal system is like a game in which tokens are manipulated by explicit rules. An automatic formal system is a physical device that implements these token manipulations automatically, and the interpretation is a systematic assignment of meaning of tokens. So it's like a token system where you go to, for example, your doctor and you take a token, you're waiting in line. That token has a meaning. So if I go into the dentist's clinic, for example, and I select token number 8, I'm assuming it's number 8 on the token represents me as the eighth person in line. But I don't know person 765431, the previous 7 in the sequence probably left the dentist clinic for whatever reasons, or it just happens to be that on that particular day the tokens began from 8. So maybe 8 is the starting point. We don't know. So the systematic assignment of meaning to the tokens is what Hoagland puts forth here, right? So this is the simplest example I can give. A semantic engine is then an automatic formal system together with an interpretation under which it consistently makes sense. So now it consistently has to make sense. It's not just situational. The striking suggestion is that given an appropriate formal system and interpretation, the semantics take care of itself, so the device need not understand the meanings of its symbols in order to reliably transform them into meaning preserving ways. So he's stating that the semantics in and of themselves has its own meaning. It doesn't need to preserve its own way. So for example, the number 8 ticket at the dentist doesn't cement the fact that I'm number 8 in line or I'm number 1 or number 2. In any case, it has its own meaning preserved. Bit of a challenge here, and that's one of the weaknesses, because how do you define meaning in this context? The objectivity and the subjectivity, right? So there is always a clash in science when it comes to these things. So this is why computationalism is often presented as a mechanization of intelligence. It replaces a tempting but empty explanation. The mind intelligently understands and decides, with a story in which intelligence emerges from a structured economy of representations, and rules that can be instantiated in a physical mechanism. So, as we saw with ACTAR and SOAR, these are physical systems that are being utilized to essentially address how the mind intelligently understands and decides. So, again, there are biological substrates that exist in computational neuroscience. That's just a hardcore fact. Can't run away from it. Question is, who puts those biological systems in place? Allah, of course. Consider a calculator that performs addition. Addition is defined semantically over numbers. It maps out 2 and 2 to 4. Yet the calculator does not literally take numbers as inputs. It takes numerals or symbols and manipulates them by formal rules, computing a syntactic function that instantiates the semantic function. In that sense, it is possible for syntax to implement semantics. Symbol manipulation can realize a meaning defined mapping without any inner agent interpreting its meanings. So symbols alone can map out meaning, right, and definitions within. So there's no need for an external source to explain. So for example, when I say because, I don't really need to explain be and cause, because it's able to map out its own meaning. And now, of course, this is not symbol manipulation. This is, in a sense, the joining of be and cause. Symbol manipulation is, for example, it's hard in English, but in Arabic, if you change certain symbols above or below an alphabet, it changes not only the meaning but also the function of the word. So this is an area I should unpack actually. I'm going to highlight that. So I'm going to unpack that. Computationalists propose that something similar is true of many cognitive capacities: perception, memory, inference, and planning. Can be explained by specifying internal representations and the algorithms that transform them. So now this is talking about Mars theory. Inshallah, tomorrow we're going to touch on Mars. So David Marr was an influential computational neuroscientist. He has a very famous three-stage analysis of how the human brain functions, learns, stores knowledge, is able to understand the world, and of course, how patterns are developed, how errors are picked out, how operations are completed, so on and so forth. So, for those intrigued, I will end it with this particular book. For those who would like to view the rest of the stream, you can go on YouTube, Mind Matter Meaning. I am there, as well as on Instagram. This full lecture slash live stream is there. So this is the book we will touch upon tomorrow. Inshallah, we will be coming live around the same time, which is 9 p.m. UK time, between 9 and 10 p.m. So vision, a computation investigation into the human representation and processing of visual information. And the chapter I'll be focusing on is the one regarding representation, should be in the middle. Okay, why am I lost? So here we go, three levels. This is what we'll be looking at. The three levels of representation exist. So very briefly, it's the computational level, the representation and algorithm level, and hardware implementation. Sound very unique and distinct, but again, they're interconnected, and I will very simply and lucid, easy language explain this, inshallah. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You can email me at kursha.mmm@gmail.com. That's Kursha, QURSHA.mm@gmail.com. Masalam.